Oh, hi there, and welcome to another episode of the ChrissieCast live from the compound. That's my house, you know, where I, your pal, Chrissie Swan, chat to interesting people from all over the world. Today's guest is veteran performer Colette Mann. She is fresh off the plane from packing up and moving to London. Yes, London. She's in her 70s. Yeah. Colette and I run the gamut in this conversation, from body image to what not to do when you're divorcing, to dealing with grief, and the amazing story of how she's already been to my house decades before it was even a glimmer in my eye. ChrissieCasters, wrap your arms around my friend Colette Mann. Welcome to the ChrissieCast, the gorgeous Colette Mann.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to see you. Now, you are live at the compound, which is an affectionate name I have for my home. This is not the first time you've been here.
Not at all. I've actually been, well, not exactly in this room, but I've been in the environs.
Yes.
Like that?
Yeah, I do.
I've been in Europe. I can speak other languages. I've been here many, many times in the past, and I've even been here since you've lived here.
Yes.
For lunch.
But specifically, I want to know about the time that you've been at my house, maybe before I'd bought it.
Oh, a long time before
Yes.
you bought it. I would say almost probably, well, maybe 43 years ago, something like
What
that.
brought you to the compound before I even knew it existed?
Well, it was the halfway house that Doreen from Prisoner lived in. The front of the house was.
Yeah.
We didn't use the inside of the house, which, let me tell you, looked nothing like it does today.
So what year would this have been that you've been to my house?
I reckon it was about 1981.
Right. So I was 7 years old living my life.
Yes.
And you, Colette Mann, that are here with me now, was
Yes.
in my house before I even...
And I was only 7 years old.
Of course you were. Of course you were.
No, I wasn't.
So what is the story? How did you come to be in this house?
Well, because this house was owned by one of our directors on, I was going to say Neighbours. No, I've got dementia, so let's go with that. On Prisoner, his name was Marcus Cole, beautiful young man, and he and his partner at the time, and I think they're still together. If not, I'm sorry. Well, you know.
I think she may have passed away. I actually think that she was the owner of the house and he was her boyfriend.
I think, see, you know more than I do. There's a bit of gossip. Anyway, he put his house, he was directing, and he said, you can use my house. As I say, we used the front a lot.
Yeah.
I remember we came into the house to sort of get changed and things like that because you shoot out of sequence. And so, but we didn't use the inside of the house. The inside of the house was a set at Nunawading.
Right. But you did use the backyard.
Yes, we used the backyard, and it didn't look anything like the backyard that I've just seen. But it was lovely because I was here, I reckon I was here probably 10, 12 times.
Wow.
And then
I just love this story so much.
And then when you bought the house, I thought,
Pardon me.
I saw it on the telly or no, I didn't see it on the telly. I saw it maybe on a real estate place, and I thought, I recognise that house. And then when I was working with you on Circle, I said, have you bought this house?
No, I wasn't living there then.
Oh, you weren't.
Anyway, I love that story. I love that I live in a piece of Australian television history. And I love that I'm currently talking to a piece of Australian television history.
Yes.
You have recently returned from the UK, where you have packed up stumps and left your home.
Yes, I did.
And went travelling.
Yes, I upped up stumps. I got very tired after I left Neighbours. I had about a year where I did some teaching because I still teach quite a lot of students acting. But basically I wasn't getting any work. I got bits and pieces. I did the Fantastic Fisk for Kitty Flanagan.
Oh, God, what a great show.
And I had done the first series, and then she asked me to do one day on the second series, which I did. And I did an ad for funerals, and I thought, oh, God, this is the end. And
The slippery slope.
yes, exactly. And I was testing for a couple of things, and, it was for actors or for characters in their late 60s, early 70s, and then you'd find that had gone to somebody who was in their 50s, which is something that Australians do. And I was whinging to my son about it, and he said, well, why don't you go to England? And I said, can't, because I tried to get an ancestry visa a few years ago when I was in Neighbours. And it was going to cost me $17,000.
Oh, my God.
And that was in something like 2016.
And how many funeral ads do you have to do to pay that off?
A lot.
Yeah.
And anyway, so he said, I'll do it for you for 10. And I said, no, you'll do it for nothing because I paid for your law degree.
Love it.
And he did, God love him. And so I got the visa in about 3 weeks because I'd done all the genealogy and all that stuff. And
you thought, why not?
And I thought, why not? So off I went. I went for 9 weeks at the end of 2022, but to have a look around, found an agent, made some good contacts, and then I went over 2023 in end of March, and I've just come back.
And may I ask your age?
74.
Most people are really thinking about slowing down at 74, and when I saw you living your best life in London, I thought, that's me. You're so inspirational.
Oh, darling, don't say that. You are.
No, you are, because so many people say, oh, I'm too old. And we say that to ourselves from the age of 25.
I know. It's funny because, a lot of my friends that are a lot younger than me, but I've always been a person who's liked to surround myself with younger people.
Yeah.
And, working on Neighbours was great for that because I sat with the kids, all the young kids.
Yeah.
Because I don't like to look back. I like to look forward.
Yes.
And I find that when people get a little bit older, not just in my industry, but just people around me, they are constantly looking backwards.
Yeah.
And I mean, backwards was great. I've had some great opportunities and I've done some great things in the back part of my life. But I am also really good at looking forward and I like the feeling that I may fail at something.
Yes. Do you think that's why? Because you studied law.
Yes, only for a short while, not for a long while.
But that was going to be a very safe, predictable career that used your gifts. What was it about what was unfolding in front of you in terms of your life that you thought, actually, I want something a bit dirtier, a bit riskier?
Well, because I'd been taken to dancing school at 3.
Yes.
I was a little sort of dumpling in a tutu.
Oh, how gorgeous.
Really hideous.
No, not hideous, divine.
And then I grew up in dancing school and I was always, even when I was 14, 15, I was still a bit of a little dumpling, well, I was a slightly bigger dumpling, and I knew that I wasn't going to make it as a ballet dancer, which is what I really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so I was lucky enough to go to professional dance classes, as they were called then. They weren't like a suburban dancing school.
Yeah.
And a guy that I learnt from called Ted Miller, and also another wonderful woman called Betty Pounder, who was the choreographer for so many musicals. I went to her classes and they both said, she is a great comedian. She's a great actor.
Yeah.
And this was at 14 and they said that's where she should go.
Isn't it great when someone that you respect says that you can do something? It often just takes one person.
Yeah, exactly. And I really, when I can, because I still teach students, I try to be that person for them, because there are so many knockers, as you would know, in our industry, and so many people that want to pull you down, that when I have really good students, and I do, because they've come to me recommended, or their friend came to me I like to build them up because it's a hard enough industry without somebody trying to pull you down.
Yes, exactly.
And so those people built me up, and so my mother then took me to acting school and all that sort of stuff. And so it was always in me to do it. And when I knew that I didn't want to be a lawyer, I quickly shifted over to an arts degree to get out of uni.
Yes.
And then I taught for 12 months to pay my mother back. And then I auditioned for Godspell, the original company of Godspell.
And away you went.
And the rest of it is theatrical history.
You referred to your body as a dumpling.
Yes.
And a slightly larger dumpling.
Yes.
I want to know what it was like to be a woman in television and theatre in the 70s and 80s with regard to body image.
In the 70s, because I started in Godspell in 1971, I don't remember anybody discussing body image at that time. I was in Godspell for 4 years and we were in overalls, so it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
And then I was
Godspell, for the uninitiated, is a giant hippie musical.
Yes, exactly. Not done very often now, but it was huge at the time.
Yeah, it was massive.
And it was the first time they ever used what we now call triple threats.
Yeah.
People who could sing, dance and act. I see myself.
Which is you.
Well, I see myself as an actor, dancer, singer.
Yes.
Singing is at the bottom, but I sang well enough to be in that. And so I never really encountered much problems with that. And then I worked for the Melbourne Theatre Company and I did bits and pieces of television. It wasn't until after Prisoner, which would have been for me about 1983, and then I was working on things like the Don Lane Show and Good Morning Australia and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That this whole thing about body image started to be a real thing.
Right.
For me, that and I have to say I don't think my body ever, even though I at times have been much, much bigger than I am now, it never really held me back because I usually played the funny, weird one who was the friend of the lead, you know.
Yes.
So, and I always saw myself as a character actress, not a lead. And so I was never one of those people who always thought that she should be playing the leading role.
Yeah, right.
I think you've got to know your limitations. And it's funny because in London, my agent in London, who I still have and they're wonderful, one of the things they said to me was one of the reasons I got knocked back for a role that I was up for in London was a woman of 71. And they said, "Oh, you're too glamorous." And I went, "What? I've never been called glamorous in my life."
Come over to my place and see what I look like as soon as I open my eyes.
Exactly. And they went, "No, you're effortlessly glamorous." And I went, "You all need to have a good look around." I said, "Or come to Australia. There's much more glamorous people than me."
You must have to have a very strong self-esteem to every day be told that you are not something.
I don't know whether it's strong self-esteem. It's just a resilience, I think. Because I don't think I've got a strong self-esteem. Lots of times I think, "Oh, I'm not good enough and I'm not this and I'm not that." But I've been doing it for so long. I've been doing it for like 50 years.
You're resilient. You understand.
You just go, "Well, I'm sorry." I mean, I tested for heaps of stuff in London.
Yeah.
And some really interesting stuff. Like I had to learn a Norwegian accent.
What does that sound like?
Oh, I'm not very good at it anymore and I can't even think what I used to say. But
Just say, good morning, my name is Colette.
Good morning, my name is Colette.
It's very good.
No, it's not. It's terrible.
What other accents do you do?
Oh, I try and do, I mean, look, you're putting me on the spot now. I try and do Irish accents. I'm very good at RP, as they call it.
What's RP?
RP is recited pronunciation. It's how the Queen, she's
Give
dead
it
now.
to us. Give it to us, Colette.
Well, I'd say, "Good morning. It's lovely to be here."
Oh, my God. Sorry, is Judi Dench
Oh, yes.
on this podcast now?
Oh, yes, we'd love her to be. I saw her on stage while I was over there.
Isn't she magical?
Not acting. She was doing a thing like this.
Oh, like a Q&A.
Yes.
In conversation, I think they call it. Yeah.
And she was with a gentleman that had helped her write a book. She'd written a book called Shakespeare, the Man Who Paid the Rent, because basically all the beginning of her career was Shakespeare.
Right.
And And there she was at 87. She's nearly blind now, apparently. Right. She has macular degeneration.
Yes.
And she was amazing and funny, and he was very great with her. She obviously knew him quite well. And every now and again he'd say, can you do something for us? And she'd jump, not do what I just said and go, oh, God, no. She'd jump up out of the chair. I was so jealous of her jumping up out of that chair because I can't jump out of a chair quite quickly like that.
Yes, but you can see.
And
so,
then, yes, that's
swings and roundabouts,
yes.
Colette.
And she would get up and just do a long monologue from anything, like she did
As You
Portia,
Like It. Yeah,
Portia,
right.
She did As You Like It. She did Juliet.
Wow.
And it was all there. You know, it was all there in her head. It was
What a
extraordinary.
shame that eventually she won't be in the world. And who else knows that much Shakespeare?
Nobody does.
Nobody.
But a lot of people say that I look like her, so I'm hanging in there.
You do look like her little sister.
Yes.
You know, but like, you know, a lot, one of those ones, sort of like I was, the last in the family that was a mistake and all of that sort of stuff, you know,
exactly.
a lot younger.
Exactly.
She wrote a book, which you just said. You are also a published author, Colette. I speak, of course, of It's a Man's World,
Yes.
spelt MANNS.
Oh, I know. How clever is that?
And Give Me a Break.
Yes.
What were they about?
Well, It's a Man's World was was written when I was pregnant with Charlie, who's
Right.
my youngest son, who's 30. Oh, I don't know how old he is. 34 maybe.
He's over 30.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I was pregnant with him and I couldn't work, and so a girlfriend and I decided we would write.
Why
this,
couldn't you work?
because when I'd had Sam, who was my eldest. Who's 36. I do remember how old he is because I worked down from there. When I had him, I had preeclampsia and all. And
right.
I had very bad high blood pressure and all that sort of stuff, which I don't have anymore, interestingly enough. But
we'll talk about that later.
yes.
I think I know why. Yes.
So I had very high blood pressure, and so when I got pregnant the second time, they said, you can't work, you have to stay home, you have to, you know, with your feet up. All
What a
that sort of
shame.
stuff. Yeah. Well, at the time, I think I was 30, no, I was 40 when that happened. I thought, oh, no, this is a disaster.
A disaster.
You know. But
That was
now,
probably the only time in your life that you've stopped.
well, probably.
Yeah.
So I decided that I'd write a book, and a girlfriend of mine had a contact with I can't remember who the publishers were, but with the publishing company, and they said yes, write it. So it was basically a lifestyle guide for women in the 90s.
Oh, I need a copy of it, Colette.
I've got a couple of copies at home. I should bring it. I'll make sure you get one.
Yes.
I've got about, I think Annie, my friend who wrote it with me, I think she found a whole lot of copies when she was moving house and she sent them to me, and I threw most of them out, but then I've kept about half a dozen.
Can you remember any of these tips for women in the 90s? I'm imagining that, you know, hey, if you want to zhuzh up an outfit, pop the collar.
Oh, yes, it was things like that.
Wear a necklace on the outside of your shirt.
Yes, exactly. I've done all of that. It was all of that, but it was more about things like renovating your house and trying not to meet the plumber in your nightie,
Right.
unless it was a really nice nightie. It was stuff like that, you know.
I did that yesterday. I had a guy come over to put a television on the wall because God knows instructions are not my friend.
No.
And I'm a very sort of like casual person. And I answered the door. I was still in my dressing gown when I answered the door. And it wasn't until a little bit later that I thought, that's odd.
It is. It's a little bit creepy. It's a little bit like Harvey Weinstein.
And I was just this whirling dervish of lady madness. I was like,
Yes.
come upstairs. And then this strange man was following me up to my bedroom and I was
you were
wearing
in
a
your
dressing
dressing
gown.
gown.
And I just thought, probably should have got dressed. Probably should have, put aside 10 minutes to chuck on something.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
it's creepy. And what was your second book about? Give Me a Break.
That was about, I was doing Vagina Monologues, a one-woman show, and my son, Sam, was 12 and broke his leg in 24 places. He likes to do things really well.
How?
Oh, look, it's a long story, which I won't bore you with because I was told two different stories. At the age of about 30, he told me the truth.
That happens, doesn't
yes,
it?
it certainly does.
Did you believe the first story he told
I
you?
did.
Yeah.
Of course I did.
So what was the first story?
The first story was that he was watching some boys play football and he was year 7, a big year 10 boy fell on him.
24 places?
Yeah, and he had his knees up and it was in the thigh, basically.
Okay.
It was the femur. The year 10 boy did fall on him, but that was when they were wrestling. That's the real truth of the story. Why a small year 7 boy decided to take on a rather large year 10 boy, I don't know, but that's the story. Anyway, he broke it in 24 places and he was only a little bloke at that time and when they put him into what they call a Zakharov cage.
Yes.
And so he had rods through.
Pins all the way through it to try and keep it
down his leg.
straight.
And so he couldn't go back to school because he was he couldn't support himself on crutches. And so he had to be in a wheelchair. And at the time, the very expensive school didn't have ramps. Of course, they have them now.
Yes.
And so he was home for 6 months. So while he was home, I wrote the story. Basically the story was my experience of him breaking his leg and homeschooling and all of that sort of stuff. And then his version of what happened. So it was a chapter with my part of the story, Sam's part of the story. Then Charlie, my younger one, went, I want to be in that book. And so I said, okay. But of course he wrote maybe 3 or 4 lines and then said, this is boring. And then I had to channel him.
What a cute idea.
And so I've got copies of that too. So and it was called Give Me a Break, a mother, 2 sons and a walking frame.
That
that's
is
what he was on.
brilliant.
Well,
and also 10 points for another pun in the title.
Yes.
Give me a break.
Yes.
It's a man's world.
I know. There's a bit of a pattern there.
Is there another book in you?
Well, funnily you should ask. About not long after I left Neighbours, I thought I'd quite like to – because before I'd been asked about writing a book and I thought I'd be quite interested to write a book. And so I started thinking of an idea, which I don't really have a title for this one yet, but it's because I teach a lot, it was about teaching acting but applying – what I teach in acting to my own life.
Right.
Like, for instance, when I walked the Kokoda Trail, right back when I was 44 or 45, something like that, 30 years ago, I learnt for myself that I really only need to look the first 10 steps ahead of me in anything in life because if I look at the whole mountain, I won't do it.
Yes.
And so so that was going to be sort of one part of it, because I teach that in acting. Don't look at the whole script. Just look at what you've got to deal with for this moment.
Yeah, right.
And then
that's similar to my little mindset that in order to achieve contentment, don't look at the next year or the 5 years or a 10-year. Like a 5-year plan to me is utterly ridiculous and unattainable. All you've got is from the time you open your eyes in the morning until the time you close your eyes at night. That's it. That's 16 hours. It's a 24-hour day. Let's say you're one of the lucky ones and you get 8 hours to sleep. You've got 16 hours left. Pack it with the good stuff and then do it the next day and then do it the next day. And then all of a sudden in the bank you've got days and days of fulfillment and contentment.
Exactly. Well, it's not always like that. My life is a bit of a roller coaster, as I'm sure yours is. But the thing is that if anything, it doesn't matter if it's a big thing or a small thing or it's a great thing or a bad thing.
Yeah.
I try and only look 10 steps ahead.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to pull myself up because I'm looking at the whole mountain.
Yes.
And it's there.
And you go, hang on.
Yeah.
That's control the controllables, as my friend Jonathan Brown said.
Yes, exactly.
Control the controllables.
That's a good thing. It's like you can't worry about things you can't control.
That's it.
And I'm starting to learn that at the age of 74, which I think is about the time I should should be learning it.
Never too late. A good day for me is when I have a walk, and I've noticed that you are also a walker.
I am.
I love walking.
So
it has
do I.
changed my life in many, many ways. Why is it important to you?
Well, I walked the Kokoda Trail, but I was much heavier, although I lost a lot of weight on that, and that was 30 years ago. And it was something that always sat in my mind because for a lot of the time when you're walking, even though I was with a group of people, you're not talking because you can't, because you're
Yeah.
and you're going uphill like that because Kokoda Trail is incredibly steep. But I've always wanted to walk, so I've done a few walks on my own. Like I walked Hadrian's Wall in England about, I can't remember, 2017 or something, and that was 7 days on your own. I got lost so many times.
God, that sounds like bliss.
Oh, well, no, it had its moments.
No, but even if it's hard, it's bliss.
Yes, it was bliss at the end.
Yeah.
And it was bliss each night because I stayed at B&Bs and they were always great because they're great. England have really got that together. I walked Milford Track in a group, which was interesting.
That's in New Zealand, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And I did that for 4 days, I think. And and in London, the last year that I was there, I used to walk easily about 7 miles a day.
Yeah, they're the ones I want to talk about. The everyday ones,
Yes.
the A to B ones, the self-care ones, the mental health ones.
Yes, and I at the moment, because I've got a bit of a hip problem, which you're going to give me the name of your man.
Yes, I will.
I've been walking less since I've been back in Australia, but I walk every day, but it's a bit boring for me at the moment because I'm only walking around the area I live in, which I know back like the back of my hand. What was lovely about London was that I'd find somewhere to walk different that I'd never been before.
So exciting.
And I love that.
Yeah. I love it when you go somewhere new. I sometimes, I've been doing that lately too, just around my area, and it is a bit dull.
Yeah.
There are many other benefits, but the snapping of the synapses and seeing new stuff and creating new pathways is not part of that sort of traditional walk. But I have, in the past, at least once or twice a week, driven somewhere I've never been before and got out of the car. And you can do that.
Yes.
And it feels like, I'm sure, I've never been to Europe, but I'm sure it feels as exciting as seeing new stuff. It's just new stuff.
It is. It's new stuff. And in London, because I lived outside, I lived in what they call Greater London, which is outside the city centre because it's so expensive. And I lived out there, and I was lucky enough to be surrounded by trees and woods, not bush. You don't say the bush, you say the woods. And so I would walk through the woods at least 3 or 4 times a week, which was lovely. It changed all the time through the seasons, which was great. And I would go a different way through the woods and quite often get lost, but I never panic when I get lost because we've got everything in our hand
That's
now.
right.
But I would do that, or I'd just go into the city and walk around a different part of the city because it's so massive, London.
Yeah.
And again, you
just got to find one little treasure and the whole thing's been worth it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
A lot of people ask me, how do I start? You walk so much. How many kilometres do you do? How many steps do you do? And for me, that is utterly irrelevant, all of it. And what I say to them is how you start is all you've got to do is make one commitment, and that is to put your runners on every morning, and then you're ready to go. Yeah. That helped me because if there is an excuse, particularly, now that I know how life-changing it is, excuses that they don't exist. But at the beginning, there's always an excuse. It's too cold, I'm already dressed for work, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. To take those roadblocks out is what helped me. Have people reached out to you and said, Colette, what can I – you're always walking, I want to walk.
Well, you see, the other thing that I do as well as walking and it's become a religion for me is that I do yoga every morning, every single morning. And
I would like to do that.
And I've been doing it for now I've done 860 days in a row.
Wow.
And look, sometimes, again, like you say, you think, oh, my God, can I be bothered? But I do it I get up, have a shower, I do the yoga.
So
And
the
it's-
routine
and
is
it's
important.
And it's only like I got up at 6:30 this morning because I needed to be here by 10,
Right.
but I had to do yoga. And you know, my son say to me, oh, well, why don't you take a day off? No, because I'm superstitious too about things, you know. If I
Right.
take a day off, something will go wrong.
And also, who wins if you take a day off? It's not
Yes.
taking a day off.
No.
It's not a
So-
it's not a chore.
No. So I would did it all the way through England too. I'd get up and do yoga, and then I'd get dressed and I'd decide that I was going to do something, like whether I was going to go. I'd never been to Regent's Canal, so I'd get a train and go there and then walk the length of Regent's Canal, or I would decide I was going to do something else. Like
So what are the key advantages for you of this daily practice of walking?
Well, it's if you don't use it, you lose it, because I'm of that age group where, you know, I do have arthritis obviously in one hip, and I think I've got arthritis in my ankle. But the thing is that goes away when you're walking. It doesn't restrict you. I mean, you said, do people reach out to me? A lot of people on social media would, you know, because I posted a lot about walking in London, and they go, oh, you're out in the rain. And as my mother used to say, you're not made of sugar.
Yes, it's so true.
Yes. And they'd say, oh, you're so lucky you can walk so far. I can't, I've got arthritis. Admittedly, I don't know their circumstances, but I think, well, so have I got arthritis, but I could sit home like my mother did and get stiffer and stiffer and stiffer and knit, or I could be out in the world
And also knit.
and knit. Yes, exactly, because I still knit. But it's just a feeling that I don't want to be – I want to keep moving, basically. And like I said at the beginning of this chat, I like to look forward. You can only look forward if you're walking, because if you look behind, you get run over by something or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
It's a great metaphor,
And
for
so
life.
I like to look
The forward motion.
Yeah, and I sound like Julia Gillard. Wasn't she always moving forward?
I feel like she was. I do love Julia Gillard, though.
But so I think that's what it is about me, is that I like to have structure in my life, and particularly after I left Neighbours, I didn't like the fact that I didn't have the structure in my life to have to get up and go to work every day.
Yeah.
So I like to do something every day.
Speaking of Neighbours, I saw it's still going.
Yes.
It was going away, and now it's back. I saw a recent storyline where Dr. Carl, who's been on the show for roughly 270 years,
yeah.
he played, well, his storyline was a poo jogger. He was riding his bike. He was struck by the need to go to the toilet, scurried into the bushes and did a poo. And I just thought that is a storyline that I don't think anyone saw coming. What is the weirdest, most unusual storyline that you've been written into?
In Neighbours, there were a number of them. I think one of them was where I supposedly got dementia, but then I got over it quite quickly.
Oh, because that's what happens.
Yeah.
It goes away.
yeah.
There's a cure for it.
Yes, exactly. And I must say that when this is a bit more dramatic, when they decided to kill off my son, who was played by Damien Richardson, I announced to them that I didn't want any hair or makeup for about 6 weeks afterwards, which caused no end of drama in a number of departments. The makeup department really supported me through it, but a lot of the directors were saying, do you know you look shocking? And I went, yeah, but
I'm grieving.
But I would
my character's grieving.
Yeah, I would be looking shocking because I know what grieving is about, you know. But the other silly storyline, which I really disliked enormously but had to do, because basically when you're working in a show like that, all those little elements are like dominoes, and if you take one out, the whole thing falls over.
Yeah.
And so they had my son, who was Damien Richardson, and my grandson, who was Chris Milligan, both in love with the same woman.
Right.
And I had to play the go-between. And I said, I'm sorry.
This is
This is really ridiculous. But
You did it.
I did it. And that was, getting back to the book idea, I had to find another way to play it, to make it work in my head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a bit like life too, that sometimes when things don't work, you have to find another way to play it, if you like.
Yeah.
And so that's what the book was about. It was things about finding another way, and then I'd tell a story about my life and then explain another acting thing, whether it be, what do you want? That's a big thing in acting. You, in every scene, you go, what do you want as the character? So asking that of yourself, what do you want? And being really truthful about the answer, you know. So that was what the book was about.
Truthful about the answer is key.
Yes.
I feel like in a weird way, ever since we met on the set of The Circle, God, must be 12 years ago now.
Yes, and I'm so excited because you were the one who got me on The Circle as a regular, and I couldn't believe how incredibly gracious and fabulous you were. And then we became friends, and we've been friends ever since.
Yeah, I feel like the minute I met you, I thought, oh, this person is wired similar to me. I recognise that in you.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just can't believe you're 25 years older than me. That is crazy because I feel like we are sort of the same person, but you're wiser.
Oh, no, I'm not.
You just mentioned grief, and that is something that I have been fortunate enough to escape so far in my 50 years. Can you tell me how you deal with grief and what were the events that made you feel grief?
Absolutely. Interestingly enough, just before we go on to that, if we've got time, I did a part-time job in London, which was role-playing for the medical profession.
Right.
So you're an actor, but you're working in front of doctors who are being examined by another doctor. And one of the big stations, that's what they're called, that I was often given in these jobs was called the Breaking Bad News station, where I had to be a woman whose son was dying. Oh. And you do it 24 times a day. And when I was doing it the first time with the examiner, who was a wonderful guy from some hospital in Newcastle, was looking at all these young doctors coming in.
So the doctors were real?
Oh, yeah, they're real.
Right, okay.
And they need this certification from the Imperial College of London because it's considered up there, you know.
Okay.
And so it was to get them to say, your son is dying, because they'll say anything else but.
Yes.
They'll say he's very, very poorly.
Yeah.
Or they'll say
it's not good.
He's struggling. He's not very good. And they'd all say that because they were from all over the world. A lot of them were Middle Eastern and and Asian and stuff like that. And they had even more cultural difficulties saying it. And I had to get them to say, as an objective, as an actor, had to get them to say your son is dying or your son is about to die. And after this examiner the first day had watched me for about 5 or 6 times, he went, in the little 10-minute break we had in between each one, he went, oh, God, this is torture. And I said, why? I said, I thought I was doing a really good job. And he went, how do you do that? How do you cry every time they come in? But again, you sort of apply it to your own life.
Right.
And I could easily think about it was one of my sons, you know. But it is exhausting to do it. But getting back to your question, my mother dying when I was, I think I was 38. I didn't know it, but I was pregnant with Sam at the time.
That's your second son?
No, my first
Your
son.
first. Oh.
Yeah. And she died, well, she got sick at 74, touch wood, and she died at 77. And we cared for her, my ex-husband and I cared for her for the last 12 months, and she died of stomach cancer. And it was awful. But interestingly enough, in that process, I think I did nearly all of my grieving as she was dying. Right. Because I just felt enormous relief for her and for me and for John when she did die. It kind of hit me about 6 or 8 weeks later where I suddenly thought, something happened, and I thought, I must ring Mum, and then realised that she wasn't there, and I had a bit of a mini breakdown then. But it was an interesting, because she was so ill for so long, you kind of prepare yourself for it. And so that was an interesting process. Then when my marriage broke up, which is now, I think, 16, 17 years ago, that's another kind of grief because you grieve for
your hopes and dreams.
Yes, and the life that you had.
Yeah.
And it took me, I should become a counsellor for women going through it. It took me about 5 or 6 years to get over it.
Wow.
Because we'd been together for 24 years.
So what did that look like, that 5 or 6 years? Because I assume that you had small children. You had to get on with it.
Yeah, my kids were 15 and 18.
Still.
And it was devastating for them too. It was awful. Those 5 years were awful.
Why?
I'll be honest, I hate to lose. And there was another woman involved whom he has since married. I haven't had much to do with him. I'm not one of those who says I can be still good friends. I can't be. I'm sorry. And I'm not unpleasant, and we've spoken, like his mother died fairly recently, and he let me know when I was in London, and we sort of went backwards and forwards with a couple of messages, but it's not somebody that I would rush to spend time with.
So what's your advice to women that, you know, have been in long-term relationships, it breaks down and they're angry and they hate to lose?
Well,
you know, what would you do again maybe expedite the grieving from 6 years to a year?
Yeah, well, unfortunately for us at the time, we were in a company together.
Right.
And so for reasons I won't bore you with.
So never shit in the nest is what you're saying?
Yes, exactly, exactly. So for reasons that, you know, taxation and all that sort of stuff and
boring,
property settlement and all that, we had to stay in that company for 5 years.
Yes, right. Oh!
And so for the first couple of years, I just tortured myself basically because I was running the company by then financially.
Yeah.
And every time he wanted more money to do something or do this, or he was working as well and I was working, the money was going into the company, but he was obviously wanting more for various,
that's hard. You would have preferred
his new life.
Yeah, you would have preferred a clean break.
Yes. And so I would say to people, if I ever had to go through it again, which I won't under any circumstances, because
never marrying again?
No, not while I've got breath in my body.
One and done? Is that it? One, or were you married again? That's right.
I've had 2 husbands and clearly I'm not good at it.
So not one and done, 2 and poo.
Yes, exactly. But I would say make the break as soon as you possibly can. And even if you do want to be friends in the future, which I'd say we wouldn't kill each other if we saw each other now, but there were times I thought of killing myself, killing him, killing her, everything, blaming everybody but myself.
The fury.
I've now got to the point where I say it was 50-50. I wasn't great. I didn't like the way he did it, but if he'd been man enough to speak up and say this is not what I want, it probably would have been a bit easier.
Yes.
But I wasn't great in the last 5 years of the marriage either. So,
in what way?
I think the kids were really important to me and getting them through, and
your focus was elsewhere.
My focus was elsewhere. One of the things that he said at the end, which was probably true, was that I had a career and all he had was a job. And so, I know. We'll talk about it off air. But there were, extenuating circumstances. But my kids were really important to me, as they are to any mother.
I think this is a really relatable situation for women in long-term relationships who have children.
Yes. And
it's a really hard balance to strike.
It is a hard balance to strike, and I think respect went by the wayside on both sides, and so I blame myself a lot for that. But it took me a long time to get to that.
Yes.
And once I got to that, I was fine about it.
And it would have been quicker had the process been quicker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't have had to deal with him even in a financial way, for the 5 years. And once I made the break and bought my own place and moved and all of that, life's got better. So my advice to women is try to cut off all unnecessary contact until you feel strong enough to deal with it in a good way. Because I did things, as we've all done at different times, I did things that I'm not proud of.
Yeah. I was in the bath last night and I read an article in the Women's Weekly, which I love, about grey divorce. And it's a new thing.
Yes.
Women are leaving relationships after 20 years of marriage and never getting married again.
Yes.
Loving themselves sick. You are in this boat.
Yes.
Why? What's wrong with marriage?
Well, I've done it twice and I suspect I'm not very good at it.
I've never done it.
Oh, well,
and I also suspect I wouldn't be very good at it.
No, well, I think you're wise. And people, I mean, I'm not offers of marriage, I'm not saying that, but I've even had offers of dalliances or relationships or whatever, and I'm just not interested. I mean, I think it's very individual. I was with somebody, as in boyfriend's husband, boyfriend, husband, from the age of 14, basically. I was always with somebody.
Yeah.
And I possibly only had maybe 3 or 4 months between.
Right, okay.
And to suddenly be on my own at the age of 56 and then suddenly, 57 really, but I thought I would never get used to it. But you get used to it really quickly. And now, not that I've had any offers to get married or anything like that, but the thought of having to defer, I know this sounds very selfish and you can make your own decision, but to defer to somebody, like to suddenly pack up and go and live in London for a year and not know when I was coming back and whatever, and not have to ask anybody. The other thing too, and
that wouldn't suit someone that you were living with. I get it.
You know,
yeah.
And even look, saying this about my ex-husband, John, he was pretty good about my career.
Is this the first one or the second one?
No, the second one. He was pretty good about my career in as much as I toured with when the kids were little, but basically one of us had to make some money. So
and also he knew what he was getting into.
Yes, exactly. My first husband didn't know what he was getting into because he met me when I was at university pretending to be becoming a lawyer.
Yes.
And I...
Your greatest role of all time.
Yes, exactly. And pretending to become a lawyer and then leaving university and becoming a school teacher, which I was for 12 months, and then suddenly I was in theatre, which he didn't cope with the change very well at all. And I totally understand that as well, you know. And so I'm a very good ex-wife. I'm just not a very good wife.
And that's fine.
Yes, exactly.
Colette Mann, before we leave, I really want to, you know, I was raised by television. We all were in the 70s and 80s. It was just like
now we're raised by Netflix. Yeah, go on.
Correct, or YouTube.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest theme songs of all time is that from Prisoner. And I wanted to know if you know any of the words and could we sing out from our podcast together the theme from Prisoner?
Well, we can have a try. Knowing you will know so many more of the words because you know the words to so many songs that I've never even heard of.
I do, but let's just give it a crack.
Okay, here you go.
Me, me, me. Let's do a warm-up.
Okay. You got a siren when you're warming up. Okay. No, further up.
I know the first things the first words have come into my head. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
He used to bring me roses. I wish he would again. But that was on the outside. And things were different then. 10-penny drums. I'm inside the roses grow. They don't mind the stony ground. But the roses there are prisoners too when morning comes around. Colette Mann, thank you so much. Brilliant. Isn't she so cheeky and wise and adorable? If you want to see a recreation in my current backyard of Colette's character Doreen from Prisoner holding her signature teddy bear, I know you do, head to the ChrissieCast on Instagram and Facebook. Thanks so much for popping over. I just love it when you do.